She did knock my wig off while I was praying for her. So let me tell you the story. In 2012, I was attending my church's annual women's conference, and it's currently being called the Women's Advance. And if you haven't watched my video on that, because it's going to be August 18th and the 19th of this year, awesome time in the Lord, always a mighty move of God. So if you click on the link above, you can get more information, watch my video on that. Well, in any case, I was attending this advance in 2012, and on the Friday night, I think it was a Friday night or the Saturday night, I believe it was a Saturday night session, for the closing session, the altar was open, so anyone who needed prayer could come up to get prayer. And I was asked to help to pray for those that were in need of prayer. So I went up and I was praying for this particular young lady. And as I was praying for her, she was very expressive, and there was some movement of her hand, and in her movement and in her excitement as I was praying for her, her hand, I don't know how, somehow touched my head and knocked my wig off. And in that moment, one of the ushers swooped in, picked my wig up off the ground. She swooped in and just kind of like popped the wig on my head. And I remember just kind of doing something to kind of adjust it, and of course I didn't have a mirror, so I couldn't tell if the wig was on backwards. It was a short cropped wig, right? So there was no way for me to really tell if it was on backwards. I didn't have a mirror in front of me, and I put the wig on, and in that moment, adjusted the wig, and in that moment I had an option. Either I should continue to pray for this young lady, or take myself to my room and just bury my head in my pillow and cry from utter embarrassment. I didn't choose the latter. I just went on, continued to pray for her. But there was an awareness, because I was embarrassed. I'm gonna confess, I was embarrassed. There was a lot going on in the room at the time, and not everyone came up for prayer. So there were some people that were still sitting in their seats, and of course I knew that there was a strong possibility that they saw. So all those that were at the altar didn't necessarily see what was going on, because people were being prayed for and others were praying for people. So anyway, no one said anything to me. Those that saw, they were gracious enough to not bring it up, because they probably knew I was just so embarrassed. But the session closed for the night after people got prayer, and I remember just going to my room, and in that moment it was like the enemy was just whispering all types of defeat in my ear, and just embarrassment came over me. And he was just saying, oh, they're probably all in their rooms right now, because we were in a hotel. They're all probably in their rooms right now just laughing at you and mocking you, and everyone has seen what your state is like. And let me back up and just explain that prior to that, I had not shown anyone what was going on under my wig, and it was always like such a big fear for me that my wig would get knocked off in public. Like if we went somewhere and there were little children standing behind me, it would just always be this fear that one of them would just reach over and just like yank my hair, and then of course the wig would come off. So I always lived in just an anxiousness and just an awareness that there's a possibility that my wig can fall off. And I have to explain that now I have a clean shaven head, but at any given moment when I used to wear wigs, sometimes I would clip it down, but there were times where I would have the sides grown out and it would be braided, and just different things. My own hair, the edges that were there would be braided down or something. So it just you never knew what was gonna go on at any moment underneath my wig. So it wasn't like I was prepared. Thankfully at that moment, I think I had cut my hair down, the hair that grows. I believe at that point I had cut it down. So it wasn't in a crazy state as it had been in previous times. So in any case, that was like one of my biggest fears. So I just remember going to my room and thinking, the thing I feared the most has come up on me. And I remember calling one of my very good friend, Koya, and of course, she was at the conference as well, but she was in her room, and I remember calling her and telling her what happened. And of course, she was at the altar praying for people, so she didn't see what took place. So I'm explaining it to her, and I can't remember if it was her suggestion or my suggestion, and just thinking, you know what, this is the beginning. Even though this wasn't embarrassing, this was, you know, perhaps my opportunity to just show people the real me. And I remember just, you know, talking to her and saying, you know what, because what we typically do at the advance is the last day people get up, the last day of the conference, people get up and they share different testimonies of what the Lord did for them that weekend. And, you know, as she and I were talking, and again, I can't remember if it was her suggestion or my idea, but just getting up and sharing my testimony and of what took place the previous night, and how, even though it was embarrassing, that clearly God was trying to bring me out of just the shame that I had been carrying and, you know, just trying to hide under it, right? Still same story in 2017. So anyway, can't remember, but I remember just thinking, I'm going to do this. I'm going to just get up and I'm going to speak about what happened, right? And the morning of, it was a Sunday morning, because we met before we dispersed to our different churches. And I remember before we went downstairs for our final meeting, I went and I knocked on Pastor Sherry's door, which is, she's the coordinator for the Women's Advance, or she's the founder and, you know, the CEO and all of that other good stuff of the Women's Advance. So in any case, I remember knocking on her hotel room door, and I showed up and I didn't have a wig on, and she was just so very affirming. And, you know, I expressed to her what happened the previous night, and if I remember correctly, she didn't see it either because she was working the altar. And I remember just crying, and she was just so affirming to me in that moment, and, you know, just saying, oh, you know, you're beautiful, and have the courage, because I expressed to her what I wanted to do and stand up in front of the women. And she just really shared some personal things, some processes that the Lord had taken her through, and it had nothing to do with hair loss or anything like that, but just her own personal story. And I think her sharing that with me, and, you know, hearing my friend Koya from the previous night, it encouraged me, and it gave me the courage to say, okay, you know what, I am going to take my wig off again in front of these ladies. And that was huge at the moment. So I remember we met downstairs, and, you know, different people were going up to give their testimony, and I went down for the closing session, and when I went down, I had my wig on. So it was my turn to go up, and I went up, and I don't even remember all that I said, but I remember expressing what took place the night before, and I just said, you know, I realized that even though this was embarrassing or something, that, you know, God was doing something even in that. And I can't remember, again, my exact wording, but I ended up taking my wig off. And granted, a lot of the women in that room, they were aware that I was bald, but many of them, the majority of them, had never seen me without my wig. And the tears were just flowing, and all the other ladies, they started crying. It was just a very emotional moment, and they just came up one at a time and just hugged me and embraced me, because they knew that it was such a very vulnerable time for me, and it was such a huge step, and it was just absolutely amazing. I think just about every lady came up and gave me a hug, and some, said affirming words in my ears and and it was just such a blessing. So that happened, like I said, in 2012, and I came back home, and I remember thinking, okay, this happened, I'm gonna do it. And I think I went wigless for like 2 days or so, and it was more like outside of my home, like literally on my front steps, but I didn't have the courage to continue on. I didn't. And of course, you know that I didn't have the courage again until the beginning of this year, 2017. But it's just amazing to me because I see how the process has unfolded, and I guess I didn't realize that the process began a lot earlier than I recognized. And I guess I should say I didn't recognize it because I wrote about it in my blog in 2012, and I'll put the link below. You could go ahead and read about this experience. But I remember saying, oh, how God had broken the chains, and how there was, he was lifting the shame. So I guess I was aware that he was trying to do something, but I didn't have the courage, quite honestly, to continue the process. So I pressed pause for 5 years. For 5 years, God is just so patient. I pressed pause for 5 years and went back to hiding under the wigs and, just not having the courage. But 2017 rolled around, and it was a new season for me, and this time it's gone on for more than 3 days, and I've gone beyond my front steps. It's just interesting to me because this summer has been just awesome in so many ways, because I'm truly walking in another level of freedom. I'm able to do things that I was afraid of doing before. I felt restricted. Like at the beginning of the season, the summer, I was able to go to our neighborhood pool with my children and actually enjoy the experience and not sit there thinking like, I wish they would hurry up with their fun because all I can do is stand in this pool. I can't put my head underwater or whatever because of just the fear that the wig would just slide off and just whatever. But at the beginning of the season, it was just such a liberating moment for me. It was just amazing. I went to the pool with my children, and I was able for the first time in 13 years to go underwater. And I was like a 5-year-old kid in a candy store. I can't tell you how many times I stood in one location in the pool and just going under with my head and then coming back up. And I would just take a couple of breaths and just go back under, because it was just like, oh my goodness, this feels so good to be able to do this, to be able to enjoy myself without restrictions, without being preoccupied or overly concerned about what is on my head. I am excited, even though I have moments of acting funny about the process and not wanting to engage with other people in conversation that's going through the same thing as I shared in my previous video. But I still see so much of that, the Lord is doing in me through this process. And I'm just, again, enjoying just another level of freedom as I reflect on what took place over 5 years ago with my wig being knocked off, to now saying, you know what, you don't even have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about knocking my wig off. I don't have to walk around with that fear. I'm just gonna take it off, and here I am. So interestingly enough, I'll end on this note. The same young lady, I'm not mad at her. She's actually just such a dear sister, and it's interesting because after the process, she has helped me in so many ways. When I was still wearing wigs, she would create different wigs for me. She helped to create different wigs for me, and just such a blessing. And God has gifted her, just the irony of it all. The Lord has just really gifted her with the ability to do hair. She is an excellent hairstylist. So I'll even leave her link down below. You can check out her business site. So God is just awesome. I am going to end